Hi, welcome to Titan Reloading. My name is Michael, and today we're going to be talking about the items you need to begin reloading. Now we are going to talk about what you require, what you're probably going to want, and some optional items that are going to make your reloading a easier, more smooth process. So without much further ado, we're going to start talking about presses. Now, I cannot go into every single press there is because there are far too many of them. I can make an entire series talking about the various presses from all the different brands that there are available. So what I'm going to do is break it into three groups: your single station press, turret press, and progressive press. So beginning with the single station, let's head over. So talking about single station presses, the one that we have in front of us here is the Mech Marksman, which turns out to be one of my favorite single station presses. But what we're going to discuss here is not specifically about this press, it's going to be about all single station presses. So what you have to know when deciding what press to get and looking at a single station press is going to be, first and foremost, the productivity of the press. The single station presses have one die and one case at a time. And what this means is you're going to be using a batch reloading process where you're going to run all of your cases through the one die you have in it, and then you're going to move on to the next step, do it to all the cases, move to the next die, the next step, run through all the cases. This is by far going to be the slowest reloading setup there is. And it's because, again, it's just one step at a time through all the cases. You could probably say you'll be topping out about 40 to 60 rounds an hour on a single station press. It is the cheapest to get into reloading because it is the simplest and has the least attachments available for it. And it also has a tendency to lend itself to precision-based shooters because they can take as much time on that individual step, on that individual round as they want to ensure a perfect reload. So again, real short advantages of a single station press is it's going to be the most affordable. It is incredibly simple. There's no complexity to this setup at all. And it is going to help you get the most consistent shooting just based on the fact that you can give every single round the tender loving care that it deserves. The next press that we are going to talk about is a turret press. Now, what differentiates a turret press from a single station press is going to be the turret up top that houses multiple dies. What this is going to allow you to do is one case from start to finish if you choose to, or you can do it in a batch reloading process like a single station, except where you don't have to pull the dies out of the press. You can just rotate the turret at your leisure. So as a quick demonstration, you would run the case up, seat the primer, feed the powder, place a bullet on the case, seat the bullet, and then crimp it, pulling the case out, and you are completed at that point. With this type of press, you can expect to be doing well over 150 in an hour if you really choose to, or you can slow down the reloading process and spend as much time on each cartridge as possible. So the advantages are going to be this is one of the most convenient and easy to use presses there are. There's a lot less messing around with the dies and things like that you have on a single station press, and it doesn't have nearly the level of complexity with the setup that a progressive press has. This is probably one of the presses that I would suggest guys starting out to get into, but it all does depend on what your needs are. The last type of press that we have to talk about is the progressive press. And these presses are made for one purpose and one purpose only, and that is producing large quantities of ammunition in as short of a time as possible. On this press, you can easily do 400 or more rounds in an hour, and even far greater than that, depending on how many of the optional items you add to it, such as an electronic case feeder or bullet feed system, things of that sort. So the way that this press is going to work is more like an assembly line, where down in the shell plate, you are going to house multiple cases that will be running through the various stations as it makes its way around the press. Because of this, you are obviously able to make a much larger amount of ammunition in a period of time as possible. So with this press, it's going to start with the case feeder, slide it in full length size that first case. Now it's going to seat the primer as it has another one on deck to be sized. Sizing powder feeder. Now it's going to move over to an empty spot here on the Dillon, which you could use the powder check system if you chose to. But now the bullet seating stage, where you would set a bullet on, run it up, seats the bullet, set a bullet, crimps the bullet, and every single time now that I pull the lever, I would be getting a fully loaded round. So the advantages, as I mentioned, is obviously going to be the level of productivity that you're going to get out of this press. The disadvantages of a press like this is going to be the setup. Because there's so many moving parts working in concert with one another, you really have to be paying attention to the setup and make sure that you have it just right so it is operating flawlessly. The other thing is going to come in if you are going to switch between, say, 9mm and 45 ACP, you're going to have to switch out the tool head up here, the shell plate, the primer, the case feeder. There's going to be a lot of things that you have to change on this press. So it's going to involve a lot more time to get it between those different cartridge setups. All right, so you've selected what kind of press you want to get. The next thing you're going to have to look at is dies. And mind you, some of the press kits out there include dies, so you may be able to gloss over this part. Otherwise, if they don't, this is definitely going to be a very real decision you're going to have to make. So in front of you, I have Redding, Lee, and Dillon dies. And it is important that even though all of these are 9mm Luger dies, each of them have different dies that are included in the die set, which is why it is very important to pay attention to what it is that you're looking at. The Redding one, for instance, has the sizing, expanding, and bullet seating die, where the Lee has the sizing, powder through expanding, bullet seating, and the factory crimp dies. The Dillon, on the other hand, has the sizing, the bullet seating, and the factory crimp. There is no expanding die with the Dillon because they expect that you're using them on a Dillon press, which already includes that die. Lee, on the other hand, includes all the dies, as if you're using it on a turret press, you're going to want them all. Redding is assuming that you're probably using it on a single station or a turret press, so they include all of them except for the factory crimp die, because even though it's not required, it's nice to have. So if you're looking at these dies and hearing everything I'm talking about and you're just completely blown out of your mind, you don't know what to choose, one of the safest bets you can do is buy the die set of the brand press you purchased. Now I do want to mention that all of these dies in front of you are threaded the same, meaning that they will work cross brands. You can use Lee dies on a Dillon press, I do. You can use Redding dies on the Mech press, I have. You are able to use them interchangeably amongst all the presses. You just need to make sure that you're getting the dies that you need, because the attachments that go along with the press and the press kit may not work with the dies. And I'll talk about that in a short bit. All right, so the next thing that we have to talk about is primer seating. Now, the vast majority of presses out there are going to have a primer feed, primer seating system already incorporated into the press. So this may be something that you don't even have to think about. However, if you are using a press like the Mech Marksman, the first one that I showed you, single station, or a few other presses out there, the Lee Reloader, and the hand press, you may need to get an additional primer feeding option. Handheld units such as the Ergo Prime and the Auto Prime XR allow you to feed primers by squeezing down on this lever here. The primers will feed through, and this pin up here will actually be what seats it. And then there is, of course, the bench mounted option all the way to the left, where you would slide your case in, push down on this lever, and much like the other primer feeding devices, will push up a pin to seat your primer. Again, this may be something that is already included with the press that you've decided to purchase, but you definitely want to make sure that you have something that seats primers. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to do a whole lot of reloading. One of the next things that you're going to have to take care of is the powder scale. Now, a powder scale is incredibly important, more important than a powder measure. And the difference is going to be a powder measure usually works in volume to determine how much powder you are filling into the case. However, your load data is going to go by a grain weight, meaning it is the weight that you have to satisfy for the load data. Because powder manufacturers can only guarantee the density of their powder to about 16%, volume and weight are not always the same when it comes to measuring out your powder. So what I have in front of you is a few different options. We have a counterbalance Lee scale over here on the side. These are incredibly accurate scales, but because they are a counterbalance analog style scale, they're not the quickest. The next up is going to be a very basic, very simple, easy to use digital scale, this specific one being an MTM DS750 scale, which is going to be a much quicker scale. However, due to the fact that it is electronics, there are other factors that you have to worry about, such as electrical interference and things of that nature. Lastly is one of the scales that I very much like using, and that is the Hornady Auto Charge on the side. Though this one is a powder measure and a powder scale built into one, it uses a trickler device to feed powder onto the scale, and then it'll stop itself once it reaches your achieved grain weight. But no matter what scale it is that you go with, just make sure that it is one that you're confident in, one that is accurate, hopefully to the nearest tenth of a grain. All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about does not happen during what is considered the basic reloading process. This happens beforehand in the case preparation stage. So once you've fired cases, it's going to be covered with all that carbon from the burnt gunpowder that was used to throw the bullet down range. And you need to clean that off, otherwise that is going to start filling up the inside of your dies, which is going to wear at their lifespan. Not to mention, if you build up enough carbon, you can actually change the inner diameter of your sizing die, leading to a whole bunch of issues you don't want to deal with. So in front of you, I have two of the more common automated options that guys go with. On the right-hand side is a tumbler with some corncob media, and on the left side is the Hornady lock and load sonic cleaner. Both of these are great options for cleaning your brass, but they are not the only options that are available. There are wet tumblers, which would use a cleaning solution similar to a sonic cleaner, but stainless steel pins media, kind of like your dry tumbler on the right, combining the two to get incredibly clean brass. Or there are methods as basic as what my dad actually uses, which is a 3M medium grit sanding block that he uses to remove carbon. But the main thing is that you are getting the carbon off before you start putting those cases into your press. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is dependent on what it is that you're reloading as to whether you need to have it or not. And what I'm talking about is case trimming tools. And as I talk about this, I will have them cycle pictures onto the page. But if you are reloading pistols, by and large, you do not need to worry about trimming those cases. Pistols do not have as much pressure. They do not have shoulders to them for the most part. And they have much thinner case walls. So the tendency for pistol cartridges is that they don't stretch after you fire them and size them. Rifles, on the other hand, do stretch when you full length size them after you fired them. I found with 223s, on average, they grow about 5/1000ths of an inch. My dad says his 308s usually, on average, grow about 7/1000ths of an inch. So after just a few firings, you can get to the point where the case length goes over what is the allowed overall length of that casing. And the reason why that is important is because of the way that rifle cartridges head space. For the most part, your rimmed cartridges head space off the rim, your belted magnums off the belt, and your rimless cartridges head space off of the shoulder itself. So what can happen is if it becomes too long, the brass casing itself can start to enter the barrel of your rifle. And if it gets to the point where it is actually contacting the barrel, the lands of your rifle, when you fire the round, it'll try to expand, but it can't. So it'll pinch the bullet in place, not allowing it to escape, and the case will have to explode because it has to relieve the pressure somehow. So rifles, you absolutely need to trim them. You need to monitor the length every single time, and once they become too long, you have to trim them. It is very unlikely that you will be able to escape this, especially if you are attempting to be safe. Pistols, on the other hand, as I mentioned before, they really don't grow all that much in between your firings, therefore they don't have to be trimmed. But there are going to be a few cases where it'll be beneficial to trim them. For one, if you want to have consistent crimping, you'll have to trim them. The crimping of a pistol cartridge is dependent very largely on the length of each individual case. So a taller case is going to get more of a crimp than a shorter case. The other thing is, if you are doing the bullet seating and the crimping through the same die, it is again beneficial to trim that cartridge. And the reason for it is, if you imagine, as the bullet is being seated, if you have a particularly long case, it could start crimping it before the bullet is fully seated. And if it is attempting to seat a bullet while the bullet is being crimped or is crimped, it'll just buckle the case under the pressure. So again, pistols, not absolutely necessary, but it is something that could be beneficial. Rifles, you're definitely going to have to monitor the overall case length, the case length itself, and when it becomes too long, you'll have to trim it. All right, so the next item that you're going to have to definitely get is a caliper or a micrometer. So what I have in front of you are two different calipers, the Hornady and the Frankfurt Arsenal. They do come in a dial form, such as the Hornady here, or a digital, as the Frankfurt Arsenal in front of you is. But the main thing is getting a caliper that is accurate to 1/1000th of an inch, so 0.001 of an inch. And any caliper that is accurate to that amount is good enough. The reason why you need a caliper is to take measurements of the overall length of your cartridge. You would need them to check the length of the casing itself, maybe even check diameters from time to time. But there are going to be measurements that you have to satisfy for your load data, and these calipers will allow you to do that. So now we're going to talk about powder measures. And while these are not necessary to have, I would strongly recommend getting them, as they are going to make your reloading sessions a lot more convenient and allow you to reload at a much quicker pace than if you weren't using them. I do want to emphasize once again that these are different from powder measures, or powder scales. Powder scales weigh the individual granules. These go by volume. And powder manufacturers are allowed about a 16% tolerance to the density of the individual granule, meaning that even if the shape stays the same, the weight does not necessarily stay the same. So you will have fluctuations between different lots. Now, talking about the powder measures themselves, there are powder measures that are going to attach directly to the press. With progressive presses, the powder measure will usually actuate itself, which is going to be the case with the two on the left, the Autodrum powder measure and the Dillon powder measure. And then the powder measures on the right are going to be ones that you would either set on a stand off to the side to allow you to manually actuate it if you're working with a single station press, for example. Or some of them have threads which allow you to mount it directly to the press, but you would still have to manually actuate it, which is the case with the green or Redding powder measure there towards the middle. I also want to state that it is a good idea, if you're just getting started reloading and not absolutely sure of what you need, to again stick with the brand of the press you are purchasing. And the reason for it is, if you get a Lee press, you would need the Lee die and the Lee powder measure to work together, as the Lee die does not hook up to other brands' powder measures. And that is going to be pretty much across the board. The Dillon powder die doesn't work with the Lee Autodrum, Hornady dies don't work with, etc., etc. I'm sure you get the point. The other thing is, with the way that some of these work, for instance, the Dylan the fail-safe rod right here only works on the Dylan press. So if you wanted to reset itself after it's actuated, you would have to have that on a Dylan press to achieve, unless you want to kind of tinker with the press and get it to work, but not quite designed that way. So again, these are the powder measures here. Not necessary, but a very strong recommendation is to use them. All right, so the next item here is going to be another optional item that you're going to want to look into, but a bullet puller. Anyone who reloads can tell you that they have probably done something in the past that would lead them to need to pull bullets. Either the load that they decided to test out in the beginning didn't have enough powder, maybe too much powder. They had to pull those bullets because they couldn't shoot them. Maybe they didn't realize the powder that they were using. Oops, I used CFE pistol in a 223, something along those lines. But a bullet puller is going to allow you to pull that bullet, reuse the powder, reuse the case, reuse the bullet. What I have in front of you is a kinetic bullet puller. So this works like a hammer. You put the case in through the top and you just smack it on something hard. You keep wrapping on it and closing down the collet system to hold it tight until the bullet comes out. There are setups that you can put on your press, which will have a collet that actually holds onto the bullet, and then you use the leverage of the press and the ram to pull the case out. That is definitely another option, but the main thing you're looking at is the ability to remove bullets. That way those components don't go to waste if you make a mistake. All right, so in this video I've attempted to cover a good basic startup of items that you're going to need, or items that I would strongly recommend for people looking at getting into reloading. I could not cover every single item there is out there. In an attempt to do that, this video would be far longer than probably the 15 minutes that it's already going to be. There are items such as go-no-go gauges, headspace gauges. There are chamber measuring tools. There's concentricity gauges. There's case overall length gauges. I mean, the list goes on as to the different items that you can add to your reloading bench. So here, just trying to keep it to the basics. Again, the items that you're absolutely going to need is a press, dies, a powder scale to measure your charges, a primer seating system, something to clean the brass, and a caliper micrometer to take measurements. And some items that you're going to want to look at adding to your reloading bench are going to be powder measures, primer feeders, whether it is or is not included on the press, and something to pull bullets just in case there were some mistakes made. And again, that wild card, whether you may or may not need it, is the case length gauge. Is the case trimming tools. Said that one wrong. So if you found this video to be helpful, feel free to like and subscribe. If there's any items that you use that you would think would be very beneficial to other reloaders, you can definitely leave a comment in the section below, or if you have questions, you can leave it there as well. My name is Michael, and as always, happy reloading.